Are you ready to face what lies beneath the water? In the depths of a dark lake, amid the fog, and on a night history will never forget, something appeared, something the human mind cannot comprehend. And now, the world knows nothing. No pictures, no evidence, only we saw and only we barely survived. We thought the story was over, but we were wrong, because the nightmare hasn't even begun. The Legend of the Lake Monster. We are now in the middle of the night, the place, beside Urquhart Castle, in a boat on the lake, with cold fog lazily resting over the still surface of the water, so that we can hardly see each other's faces. The boat sways gently. The time, late July of the year 1964. The event, Sir James McKillop has decided to prove his theory. In silence, he looks at his watch with its glowing hands, then looks at me, or so it seems to me, and at Maggie and Ewan, then says, pressing on every syllable of his words, "The time has come. Remember, gentlemen, there is still time to turn back. I want to hear your consent once more." Then he turned to Maggie, asking, "Maggie?" Maggie uttered a vague murmur, meaning, "Go on," and placed the necklace around her neck. Dr. Ismail, I knew that the gates of hell would open within minutes, and that God alone knew what the morning sun would reveal. Yet I was driven along a path I did not know where it would lead me, and I merely nodded in encouragement. "Please, continue." Sir James coughed slowly, then said as he reached into his pocket, "So be it." He took out the ivory horn from his pocket and blew into it. There is an old saying that every cave beneath the lakes of Scotland hides a terrifying mythical monster, and I did not know this saying at that time in the year 1964, and that was my fate. After every story of mine, I think I have reached wisdom. Then I discover, in my next adventure, that there is another peak I knew nothing about, and I realize what a fool I was yesterday, even what a naive man I was moments ago, and I imagine I have reached the ultimate understanding. But how did I not realize then that wherever I go, there are monsters and demons, and as long as there are monsters and demons, then I, inevitably, must face them. This is my fate, in which I have neither guilt nor merit, yet for the 1000th time, I admit that I was naive. That was not the first time I visited Scotland, nor was it the first time I entered the University of Dundee. I had come to this country before during the period of my scholarship when I obtained my doctorate, and I already had close friends there. The Scots are indeed English, but they differ greatly from the Englishmen you know. They are people of great kindness and warmth, free from coldness, arrogance, and gloom, and they are not hot-tempered like the Irish. At the University of Dundee, I had many cheerful stories and memories that were carved deep within me forever. And today, after about 10 years, I return to my dear friends of the past, Mackenzie, MacArthur, and McDavid, and I do not know why all Scottish surnames begin with Mac, and why more than half of their men are named Andrew. Remind me to ask about that if time permits. What matters is that I met my great professor, Sir James McKillop, and I was utterly fascinated by him. His graying hair, his strange sideburns, his thick eyebrows. He always made me feel as if he were one of those giants of medicine you see in great references, whose names are always preceded by the title Sir. Then there was his friendly simplicity, his elegant gestures full of dignity, and his logical mind. All of this made me adore him like a teenage girl adores her handsome teacher. He shook my hand warmly, and I was pleased that he remembered me after all these years. "Dr. Ismail, isn't that right?" The corner of my left lip trembled as I politely whispered, "Yes? Rifat Ismail, my failed student." I smiled awkwardly, embarrassed, not knowing how to respond, while he continued, "So, you have returned to Egypt and opened a private clinic where you suck the blood of poor peasants in your country, and you have forgotten everything about scientific research. Don't you remember that?" I cried out in panic, swearing that this had never happened, that I still owned nothing but my apartment in Cairo, and that I had never changed at all. Then why did you stop attending the London conferences? Should I tell him the reason, which might seem ridiculous to him? For a moment, I did not know how to explain, until he suddenly surprised me with a more precise and embarrassing question. "Any news of our colleague, Dr. Richard Cummings?" I smiled awkwardly and said, pretending to be innocent, I haven't seen him since the hematology conference in the year 1959. That is the point exactly. He said it suspiciously, looking into my eyes with that steady gaze that used to tear apart all my lies and pretenses in the past. And he added, "He invited you to his country house back then?" Then, nothing. No news about him at all, except that he traveled to Australia, resigned from his job, and all his correspondence stopped. He didn't even leave an address to contact him. So do you know what happened at that time? You were the closest to him and the last one who saw him. It was clear that I would have to tell the story of the mummy of Count Dracula and Catherine's transformation into a vampire, or what she tried to convince me of, and my escape into the dark, and everything that could bring upon me the mockery of this great professor, or his doubts about my sanity. The truth is that I had buried this bitter memory deep in my mind and covered it with tons of the dust of daily troubles. I did not want it to return again to spoil my life. I said to Sir James mysteriously, "It's a long story. Then you will tell it to me tonight." "Here? No. I'm inviting you to my mansion in Inverness-shire to spend the weekend, and there we will have a wonderful evening in which you'll tell me everything. There's a full program waiting for you." I tried to avoid it because, frankly, I no longer felt very comfortable with these English professors' invitations to their homes. For the full program, Dr. Richard Cummings had prepared for me was spending the night beside Dracula's mummy with a teenage vampire. So what full program had this man prepared for me? But he was firm in his invitation, and I did not have the guts, as the English say metaphorically for courage, to refuse it. My mansion is just a few steps away from Loch Ness. He said that with a wink, assuming I knew the significance of the name he pronounced. But I didn't know any significance for it, and the only thing that caught my attention was the letter Koch that he pronounced with strength and confidence. The Scots use the K sound often in their speech, giving a strange impression to the ear, so I repeated after him, questioning, "Loch Ness?" "It means Lake Ness. You know that all Scottish lakes begin with the word loch, except for Lake Menteith. The word loch means lake." I understood. I didn't really know much about Scotland. He sighed and said, "That's your problem. You spent 2 years here studying, yet you never even tried, not even once, to learn something about the country where you studied. Isn't it time for that?" "Yes, but enough excuses. You must arrange your affairs, and we'll meet here exactly at 5 o'clock. And remember," then he looked at me with a meaningful glance, "Maggie will be there?" Maggie will be there. The mines exploded one after another in the sea of my memories. Maggie, the delicate, fragile girl who could walk over grass without bending a single blade. Those blue, honest, innocent eyes that made you feel like a devil. That wild golden hair. The hands clasped together in the streets of Edinburgh. The youthful dreams. And my clumsy attempts to appear to her as a seasoned man and a gentleman. And her naive attempts to appear to me as a mysterious woman who understood life. Then we would drop our masks and laugh like children. Maggie was Sir James's only daughter, and she was studying physics at the University of Dundee when we met. Somehow I realized that her father did not object to our relationship, if he wasn't actually encouraging it. Days passed, and our emotions reached that peak beyond which there could only be descent. When the scholarship term ended, she said to me tenderly, "Stay here, Rafat. Stay with us. Father will find you a respectable job in his hospital, and we'll be happy." I said to her gently, "Come with me, Maggie, to Egypt, to my warm, sunny country and my kind people. We'll be happy. I can't leave my studies and my country. And I can't betray my country that sent me on this scholarship. I won't leave my mother and my sister." It was a long, fruitless discussion, and in the end we reached one important agreement, that we would never agree, and we separated. For 2 years we continued corresponding, and then, you know how these things happen. I can't even remember who stopped writing first, but we did stop indeed. There remained in my soul only a faint trace of her, like the memory of a child's moist kiss on your cheek. It soon dries, but it leaves a refreshing afterglow in your spirit for a while. Maggie will be there. And there, in the elegant dining room, I met her again after all those years. Dr. Rifat, I believe. She said it playfully as she shook my hand, that cold, glass-like hand I once feared to kiss. I bowed awkwardly and mumbled, "Miss McKillop, you've changed a lot. Now, at the threshold of 40, she was far from that fragile creature I had once adored. She had become a woman, and how that disappointed me. Yet I was ready to revive every ounce of love I had once felt for her, if only she could prove to me that her soul had not changed. Of course, she wasn't married yet, as long as she hadn't objected to my calling her Miss McKillop. I fear you've become more handsome, and I fear you've become more enchanting." She sat beside me at the table, while Sir James sat at its head. To his right was a beautiful lady in her mid-30s, whom he introduced to us as Mrs. Elizabeth Gold, the widow of the late Commander Rhett Gold. To his left sat a sharp-eyed woman he introduced as Constance White, and beside her was her husband, an old bald man who kept glancing at me with wary, mysterious eyes. It was an exquisitely arranged feast, so refined that swallowing any bite of it seemed an effort not to be underestimated. As for Maggie, she was alarmingly friendly, never stopping her chatter for a moment, while I was lost in my own private battle with table manners, trying not to appear rude or barbaric in the eyes of these pretentious people. So I limited my responses to her words with forced nods, meaning that her talk was very amusing indeed. At last, dinner was over. The butler led us with solemn dignity through a long corridor adorned with old oil paintings, with knights' armors standing on either side, holding their lances as if ready to fight a new battle. On the wall stretched a massive ancient tapestry depicting scenes from the history of Scotland. That atmosphere, one could hardly believe it truly existed, that it was really there, and yet it stirred the imagination to its farthest limits. I leaned close to the butler's ear and whispered to him meaningfully, "By your father's life? Tell me, sir." He said it from the depths of his being, in a very refined tone, with pride, as though he had been insulted. I continued my question. "Are you sure there are no ghosts in this mansion?" "Sir? I mean, this mansion isn't haunted by the ghost of Lord so-and-so or Lady so-and-so, and they don't appear, for example, when the clock strikes midnight." He looked at me in confusion, trying to make sure I wasn't insane, then began laughing awkwardly. "Ah! The gentleman is joking." I didn't know the gentleman had such a fine sense of humor. "Ha ha!" Then he pointed toward the sitting room and said in his lofty, reserved manner, "Now, if the gentleman would kindly be seated here while you have your coffee, my master will join you shortly." The atmosphere in the sitting room was cheerful and pleasant, especially as the gentle summer breeze played with our dreams. And when Sir James joined us, amusing conversations began about many things I can no longer remember. Then he asked me about Dr. Richard, so I began telling him that story of mine. I described it vividly, capturing the atmosphere so well that the eyes of everyone widened in terror as they listened. And when I moved on to my story about the werewolf in Romania, silence filled the room, and it seemed I had completely captured their minds, filling me with a burning pride. Then I told them the story of the Nadaha, and their astonishment and excitement reached their peak. They let out cries of awe and fear whenever the events of my story grew more intense. I had mastered the art of conversation and triumphed over my former social anxiety that had nearly ruined my entire evening. Mrs. Gold leaned toward me and said, emphasizing her words, "You have faced many dangers, Dr. Ismail, and you truly are a remarkable man," said with a hint of irritation, "or a remarkable storyteller." I looked at her in surprise. She was jealous, truly jealous. So I still lived there in her heart. Her accusation that I was pretending filled me with secret joy. I stared steadily into her blue eyes and whispered, "My dear, you haven't changed." "What do you mean?" "I mean that all your tenderness melts away and turns into the ferocity of tigers the moment you feel that a danger threatens your heart. You're arrogant, and you love me." And just like that, I don't know how our hands met, how 10 years melted away in mere minutes, how we went out to the balcony watching the clear night. Around us rose the proud highlands of Scotland, and the night breeze whispered its secrets to us, carving our names upon the surface of the lake. Loch Ness. Behind us, in the sitting room, the others were chatting and joking, and someone put on a delicate record on the phonograph. The deep voice of Tino Rossi rose, singing in Italian about something I couldn't understand, but surely it was about my feelings, describing the beating of my heart at that moment as I could never describe it myself. I know nothing of my life without you. It's nothing but long, exhausting nonsense. I belong to your eyes. Then you will stay with me forever? Forever. Brother Tino Rossi was still describing what I felt in words I didn't understand, and her blue eyes were filled with tears. And there, in the darkness of the night, her features seemed softer to me, her old delicate face rising from its grave. And then she shuddered, her expression stiffened. I saw her looking far away, toward the waters of the lake. Is there something? She pointed in the direction of her gaze and exclaimed, Tell me. Do you see something moving on the surface of the lake? Or are my eyes deceiving me? I looked where her finger pointed, to the shimmering waters of the lake under the starlight, stirred gently by the breeze. There was nothing. And yet, indeed, something dark and strange, like a smooth rock, was moving slowly over the water, sometimes rising, sometimes sinking, but keeping a steady direction toward the lake's shore. I said, narrowing my eyes to see better, It's a piece of floating wood. She said, swallowing audibly, No, you don't understand. Then she pulled away from my arm while I still understood nothing and stood at the balcony door calling her father inside. Daddy, it's Nessie. Nessie? What is this girl talking about? And what fault is it of mine in this fleeting moment escaping the snare of time that this brother Nessie, whatever it may be, should appear? Sir James rushed out of the room like a man stung, a thick cigar dangling from his lips, and muttered through his teeth, No, not at this time. Impossible. Cried confidently, Come and see for yourself. Sermes looked at the lake for a moment, then murmured, But, by heaven, it's true. Tell, to bring the camera and the zoom lens. Mrs. White, who had entered the balcony with the others, said, It's no use. The flash won't illuminate such a distance. Sir James agreed with her irritably, then returned to stare at the scene. I stood there like a fool, understanding absolutely nothing, so I cleared my throat and asked politely, What is Nessie? Sir looked only at himself, and I thought he would answer me, but he was lost in thought and paid no attention to my question. Instead, he turned to Mrs. Gold and asked, Do you think they saw it in Urquhart? I don't think so. He scratched his head in confusion, then muttered, But today is the 17th of July. There must be some mistake in my calculations. What is Nessie? She glanced at Maggie in annoyance, then went back to whispering with Mrs. White. What is Nessie? She said, looking into the distance, the starlight reflecting in her pupils. It's the pet name we use in Scotland for the monster of Loch Ness. The legend of the lake monster? The lunar eclipse has caused the full moon to be hidden tonight. That is the explanation. We were sitting in the living room, the smoke of tobacco filling the place, while the women began playing the game of cancan. And the scene I had lived an hour ago had shaken me deeply. It was true that it was not clear, but it was certain and left no room for doubt. Yes, it is the eclipse. There is no doubt about it, said Sir James as he scratched his head. I asked him with interest, Is Loch Ness the largest lake in Scotland? No, the largest one is Lake Lomond. And what is the story of this monster? In mystery, Sir James narrowed his eyes and blew out cigar smoke, saying, It is a long story. Then he tapped the cigar ash into a glass ashtray beside him and said, The best person to tell you this story is Mrs. White. Constance, would you tell Dr. Ismail the story of the monster? The old man, whose presence I had completely forgotten, said, My wife is an expert on the subject. She has written an entire book about it. Constance turned over her shoulder while busy playing and said without looking at me, There isn't much to say. The story began in the year 1933 when John Mackay, owner of the Drumnadrocket Hotel, went for a walk by the lake with his wife. And there they saw what we saw ourselves almost exactly. A dark, curved, cylindrical body sliding across the lake's surface. And of course, since two people saw it, that means it wasn't an illusion. That's why the news spread, and they named the monster the Loch Ness Monster. I said doubtfully, But they might have agreed on a fabricated story for the sake of fame or to promote their hotel business. Constance continued the story without commenting. On the 11th of May of the same year, Alexander Rebu and his son Alastair were walking by the lake and saw the same thing swimming toward Urquhart Bay in an unusually spiral motion. And I finished my cards. She threw her cards on the table, declaring her victory over Maggie and Mrs. Gold. Your playing is that of beginners, my friends. Maggie shouted in protest, demanding another round, while Mrs. Gold began sorting the cards. Constance continued her story while taking her cards again. After that, William Brodie, while in his boat, the Arrow, saw that creature 2 miles from Urquhart Castle. I asked curiously, always Urquhart Castle? Yes. Every time, this thing is seen somewhere between Urquhart Castle and Augustus. Were there other sightings? Yes. It has been seen about 300 times. I whistled in amazement, and she smiled with satisfaction, saying, the description was always the same, a long cylindrical body, its length ranging between 6 and 15 meters, swimming at a speed of 20 knots, and its swimming style is either spiral motion or continuous undulation. Some said it had a horse-like head, but I don't trust that addition much, and no one has ever heard it make a sound so far. And were they able to photograph it? Hundreds of photos, but they were all taken under the same conditions in which we saw it tonight. That is, they were all unclear images, scientifically unreliable. And did scientists try to study this matter? She said as she arranged her papers. More than once. The most serious attempt was that of the scientist Wetherell, who came from Glasgow with a full team of scouts. They spent many days waiting for the appearance of this creature, but they were not successful. In fact, Brighton Circus announced a huge cash prize for whoever could capture this monster. But of course, before you capture the monster, you must first find it. And for that reason, no one won the prize. Then came the attempts of the naval officer, Commander R.T. Gould, may God have mercy on him, and they were somewhat successful. R.T. Gould? Then Mrs. Gould? Yes, she is his widow. But what a coincidence. Mrs. Gould smiled bitterly and raised her face toward me. It's not a coincidence. The Ness monster is what brought us all together here, because we, all of us, are interested in this story. Sir James said kindly, we are a group of friends searching for the truth, and we must find it. Mrs. White's husband is the director of the Caledonia Canal, which guards the lake, and Mrs. White herself is the author of the most important book about the monster. As for Mrs. Gould, she is the widow of the author of the second most important book about this creature. Then there is Maggie and myself, by virtue of our proximity and involvement in the events, for we have seen it many times. I even almost ran it over with my car. Your car, is it? Yes. It often leaves the lake to wander here and there, and many people have seen it doing so. I smiled sarcastically and began to chuckle quietly. Sir James said angrily, what are you laughing at? Everything we've said is scientific fact. I hastened to apologize, explaining that I wasn't mocking their words, but rather my own strange luck, which always throws me into places haunted by ghosts, sleeping vampires, or lurking monsters. Then Bertram White spoke, in a calm, objective tone. Whether the monster exists or not is still open to much debate. All these people have seen something, but they have never seen a fully formed monster breathing fire from its mouth. In other words, there is indeed something that people frequently see in this lake, but we do not know what it is. My wife has studied all the other possibilities. Mrs. Constance said impatiently, as if she had told this story many times before. The scientists have thought of everything. They said this thing might be a mirage of wild geese, or a mass of salmon fish, or playful dolphins, or even a giant octopus. Maggie said, but the strongest possibility is the oarfish. It's a type of fish that lives here. Its scientific name is Reg. Mrs. Gould said, Regalicus glesnin. Yes, exactly as she said. This fish has a horse-like head. Its length is terrifying. What? And it lives for 20 years. It fits our description perfectly. But none of what has been said would appear in photos the way we saw it. I said absently, but I don't understand. This thing. It's not harmful by nature. I mean, it does nothing more than appear at night and stir curiosity. Sir James said, that's true. Then he gave a meaningful look and murmured, until a month ago. Once again. In the morning, Maggie and I walked along the shore of Loch Ness, our hands entwined. Inverness Shire lies in the north of Scotland, embraced by a group of highlands called the Grampians. It contains the highest point in all of Britain, known as Ben Nevis. From Ben Nevis, you can see the valleys lying asleep at your feet, and Loch Ness clearly visible. For Loch Ness is the nearest rift between the Grampian Highlands and the Northern Highlands, and this rifted region is called Glenmore. As Maggie told me, Loch Ness is one of the narrowest lakes in Scotland, in some parts not exceeding 1.5 kilometers in width. Its depth is 266 meters. Its area is 56 square kilometers. Its length is 83.4 kilometers. I do not know what benefit there is in recording these numbers, but I write them for geographical accuracy and to prove to dear Maggie that I was not such a hopeless student after all. I said to her teasingly, "Maggie, I haven't seen a Scottish man wearing a skirt yet." She laughed mockingly and said, "That's just a stereotype. It's a traditional costume we wear sometimes, not all the time. Just like we don't imagine Egyptians without their galabias and tarbooshes." She added playfully, "Your image of a Scotsman is a man wearing a beret and a kilt, playing bagpipes, and drinking whiskey all day long. Cinema and literary cliches made you idolize the stereotype." I replied, "True, but the skirt isn't called a skirt. It's a kilt, and Scotsmen aren't as stingy as they're described on the continent." She laughed softly, gazing steadily into my face. "Ah, my angel, if only I had a more beautiful face to show you." In the firelight, the traces of years were clearly visible on her face. She was no longer as radiant as before, yet she remained wonderful in every way. I didn't need much effort to fall in love with her once more. This would be the second love in my life. First, I loved a delicate, fragile girl named Maggie, and now I would love a mature, confident woman, the same Maggie. She said absent-mindedly, gazing at me, "By heaven, you've truly grown old." Sorry for having aged, and I promise I won't repeat that mistake. She burst into laughter, then drew her face close to mine and whispered, "Forever? What? Will you stay with me forever? Until all the stars burn out, and never." And then I screamed hysterically as she pointed toward the lake. "Do you see it? Nessie is moving there. Damn it!" That creature intends to shatter my nerves. It always chooses the worst, or perhaps the best, possible moments to announce its presence and continue its foolish journey through this lake. There it was, the gray cylindrical body cutting its way through the waves from afar with water spray spreading around it. The closest thing, a submarine, moving beneath the surface, with about 30 centimeters of its body above the water, yet it seemed softer and more flexible than metal. No doubt it was alive. A giant fish, or a whale, or something of that kind. Maggie exclaimed, and I had begun to resent both her and her monster, in astonishment. No one has ever seen it in daylight before. Then she looked toward it wistfully and sighed. "If only we had a camera." I said to her, reaching into the handbag I was carrying, "I have one, but don't tell me you intend to waste several shots on that absurd thing." She shouted angrily as she snatched the camera from me and adjusted its lens. "You had it with you all this time and didn't bother to tell me? If it dives before I photograph it." "But I don't understand. It'll just be another picture that proves nothing. Waves, waves, and a gray shape among them. Besides, the film is black and white, which will make things even worse. Just gray densities showing nothing." "Shh." She said that as she aimed her lens toward the target, and click, 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 dozens of shots of what she believed to be today's miracle. Click, click, crack! The film ended, fortunately, and before I could comprehend, she left me standing there like a fool and started running toward the castle, shouting and waving the camera. "Daddy, it's Nessie. I photographed it in daylight." And I stood alone on the shore of Loch Ness watching that moving thing in the distance. In anger, I raised my fist and shouted in Arabic, which, fortunately, no one understood. "Our days will come, you rusty sewer pipe." But then I remembered what Sir James had told me last night, which made me prefer not to challenge that creature. Instead, I decided to end my walk and return to the castle. It was a very large castle, this one owned by Sir James. Every corner of it reminded me of Scotland's many ghosts we see in the movies. The knights' armors standing in the hall seemed almost alive, as if about to move at any moment. And of course, there had to be a whole network of tunnels and labyrinths beneath this castle, a forgotten crypt, and perhaps even a buried treasure. Then there was the dignified, overly formal head butler, Graham, whose presence filled me with unease and a sense of foreboding. If this were an Agatha Christie story, Sir James would have been found murdered in his study, and the detective, Hercule Poirot, naturally, would have found no better suspect than this mysterious butler. But this wasn't an Agatha Christie story. Fortunately for Sir James, or unfortunately for me, Sir James walked me through the oil paintings, introducing me to the members of his noble family, of which he was the last, both by lineage and by fact, since he had no sons. He had always loved medicine, so he pursued it, becoming a doctor and a professor to me and to others. My family dates back to the time of Macbeth himself. Macbeth! He laughed gleefully and said, "I can't believe you've spent 2 years in Scotland without knowing that Macbeth, the hero of Shakespeare's play, was Scottish." But he's a fictional character. No, the historical basis of the play is true, except that Macduff didn't actually kill him. He lived until the year 1055 and died a natural death. Then he was succeeded by Malcolm III in the year 1058. Then followed Scotland's complex and tangled history, and the line of kings who ruled us from Holyrood House Palace. Then he placed his hand on my shoulder and led me to his study, saying, "But enough of that. Come, let's see the photos of your monster that Maggie took." They've arrived now, and on his elegant antique desk were scattered the photographs Maggie had taken that morning. They were, as I had expected, utterly poor and unclear. Water droplets on the lens had made them even worse. Completely useless, aren't they? He asked, offering me a cigar as he sat behind his desk. I replied, "I warned her." He said to me, "But there is something new worth paying attention to. The Loch Ness monster has changed its pattern of appearances." "Pattern?" He smiled playfully and said, "Of course. Isn't it a British monster? It's organized and very precise. Its appearances are not random at all." Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a rolled sheet of stiff paper, spreading it across the desk. It was covered in red and green dots, detailed drawings of Scotland's northern coast, and several arrows. He began calmly explaining that this chart attempted to pinpoint the monster's locations and dates of appearance, correlating them with astronomical positions, the moon's phase, the hour, and natural phenomena such as tides. It was clear that the creature moved in a circular path, centered about 100 meters away from Urquhart Castle. It also preferred nights of the new moon. When the moon disappeared, the tide receded and midnight struck. Then it would appear. Sir James, or rather the genius who had noticed these details, had drawn a precise curve predicting exactly where and how it would appear next time. In August 64, it will appear at midnight on the 11th day here. In September 64, it will appear at midnight on the 6th day here. I exclaimed in amazement, "That's brilliant." "So all you need to do is be there at that exact moment with your cameras and spotlights." He shook his head and said, "We haven't done that yet, and I'll tell you the reason in a moment." As I studied the complex map before me, a question crossed my mind. And where does it go between these appearances? Where is its lair? Sir James scratched his head in deep thought, then murmured, "That is the question," as Hamlet would say. "There are 2 possibilities. First possibility, it lives in a cave beneath the lake. And you know the famous saying, 'Every cave beneath a Scottish lake hides a mythical beast.' Second possibility, it lives in the North Sea, and when the floods rise in January and February, it manages to enter Loch Ness through one of the 7 Caledonian canals. But how many mysterious questions surround this creature?" The Rock of Sacrifice. Sir James said, "The press has always supported the second possibility, especially since the monster never appears in the years when there is no flood. The North Sea is full of mysteries, and it may contain hundreds of creatures like our monster. And what do you think? I'm neutral. Experimentation is the only measure I believe in." I said enthusiastically, "Why don't you set up a net like those used around ports to block enemy submarines, to close off the Caledonian canals?" He replied calmly, "And then? Then we'll know. If the monster doesn't appear again in Loch Ness, it means it's trapped in the terrifying North Sea." He smiled reproachfully and said, "Still as hasty as ever." Then he began to explain what I had missed. This would require a net 2 kilometers long and 290 meters high to block the canal. How could we build it? And how could we halt navigation? Even if we did, it wouldn't prove anything, because if the monster happened to be inside the lake when we placed the net, it would continue appearing as usual, and we'd learn nothing. Think of another solution. I began to think feverishly, but I reached nothing. So I told him that my mind had failed, and he, playing with his pen, said, "Sonar. Ultrasonic waves can monitor the canal entrances without blocking them, and they can study the depths easily and at minimal cost." The Department of Acoustic Physics, under Maggie's supervision and with Bertram White's approval, the canal's director, monitored all 7 canals throughout the flood season using a complex ultrasonic system. And the result? Negative. Only fish passed through the Caledonian Canal. Yet despite that, Nessie appeared again. So what do we conclude? Exactly, that the monster was always there, at the bottom. Then he stood up and began pacing the room, his hands clasped behind his back in that magnificent stance I knew so well. After several minutes of silence, he said to me, "I noticed that the monster's appearances were always around the circumference of a circle whose center lay near Urquhart Castle. Commander R.T. Gold tried to determine the exact center of that circle, and he found it to be a massive rock in the middle of the lake. We secretly explored that rock, carrying some pickaxes, and found human bones, all of them hands and wrists, and a decayed wooden chest that crumbled in our hands when we tried to lift it out. Inside the chest were a strangely shaped necklace, a horn made of ivory, or perhaps from a wild bull, and a piece of leather." I froze in my seat, for the story was beginning to take an incredibly thrilling turn. Personally, I love these kinds of stories, and I imagine many of you share my enthusiasm. Sir James continued speaking, and here is the scroll. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a dirty, decayed piece of parchment covered with faint, crude drawings. Boats, people, and something like a serpent emerging from the water. I didn't understand much of the symbols, nor did I try to strain myself to. Sir James said, "You know that northern Scotland was occupied by Viking and Celtic tribes during the 12th century, in the era of King David, son of Henry I, and afterward. Of course, I didn't know any of that, but I nodded as if it were old, familiar information." Sir James went on solemnly, "We have reason to believe that this manuscript belongs to the Viking tribes, and it depicts a very intriguing story. I'll explain it to you, as we've studied it thoroughly. The first scene depicts angry gods. I believe it to be Odin, the pagan deity of the Vikings. The second scene shows a serpent-like monster with a horse's mane attacking people from the water. The third scene depicts a man blowing a horn near one of the bays. The fourth scene shows a girl chained to a rock, her lower half hanging in the water, and the monster advancing to devour her. On her chest is a distinctive necklace. Notice that the moon is absent in the image. Now we can piece the story together. The Vikings, or perhaps the Celts, used to offer sacrifices to the Loch Ness monster so that it would leave them in peace, believing it to be the wrath of their pagan goddess Odin. The sacrifices were offered on this rock in the form of young virgins bound by chains and wearing the necklace of redemption. Then their priest would stand by Urquhart Bay and blow the horn. The water would stir, and the monster's head would rise from its cave. Imagine how dramatic that scene must have been. Personally, I would never wish to witness such a sight. This happened regularly, according to their religious calendar, which unfortunately I don't know much about. But it allows us to predict it. As time passed, there were no more Vikings, nor Celts. So what was this poor creature to do when it lost its food? It returned to its dark cave, sorrowful, waiting for deliverance, waiting to once again hear the sound of the horn. He invites him to dinner. Over time, the monster learned to eat fish, but it kept circling the sacrificial rock at the same times it was used to, the times when the Vikings used to offer their sacrifices. The taste of beautiful girls remained alive in its memory, and it hoped those days would return again. Then Sir James turned to me and asked, "Do you have any questions?" I cleared my throat and said, "Is it the same Viking monster? I mean, how could a living creature survive from the Viking era until today? Around 8 centuries?" Sir James said, Perhaps there was more than one, breeding among themselves and passing down to their offspring a vague memory of the sacrificial rock. Or perhaps it is the same monster. That in itself is a scientific phenomenon. Why shouldn't its long life be another one? A turtle can live for 2 centuries. Why couldn't this creature live for 8? I said in confusion. And the necklace? It must have swallowed it each time. So how do we explain that? He said calmly. They made a new sacrificial necklace each time. It wasn't difficult or costly. I thought for a while, then said with some relief, actually, your theory seems consistent, and allow me to add that the Viking ships that roamed the North Sea used to carry on their bows a wooden carving of a monster's head very similar to our image of Nessie, as if they wanted to please Odin, or trick the monster so it wouldn't attack them. It must have been a terrifying sight when the monster rose before their ships in the darkness of the night, amid the dreadful North Sea. I shivered as I imagined the scene and thanked God that I hadn't lived in that time. Sir James said as he gathered his papers, "But I haven't yet told you the most dangerous part. The necklace and the horn were stolen from Commander Gold under mysterious circumstances." Stolen? Yes. Then another thing happened. The monster began to appear at irregular times, meaning someone is using the horn to summon it whenever they wish. And for what purpose? That's what I gave you a hint about last night. Then he added in a low voice, "We visited the rock 2 weeks ago, Maggie and I, and we found 2 chains fixed to the rock, hanging into the water. We pulled the chains to see, and what do you think we found?" I said in terror, "No, don't say it. Yes, as you understood. 2 hands and wrists bound in chains, completely severed. They were what remained of a person devoured entirely by the monster, leaving only the bound part because it couldn't tear it off. And the hands were delicate, which suggests that they belonged to a girl. And in the town, the police were searching for a young blonde woman named Jocelyn, who had disappeared 3 days ago and hadn't been found since. And of course, it doesn't take much intelligence to know where this Jocelyn went." I shouted in disgust, feeling the world spin around me. "Sir James, do you mean that someone has resumed the practice of offering human sacrifices to the Loch Ness monster?" He replied with heavy coldness, "Indeed, and whether this person is a murderer, a madman, or a deranged scientist, the result is the same. He knows exactly what we know. He kidnaps the girl, chains her to the rock, then summons the monster with the horn to send her to Valhalla." I gasped. "How horrible," Sir James added, his voice taking on an unnecessarily dramatic tone. "The final observation is that this girl was of Swedish descent, meaning her ancestors were among the northern invaders." The basement. Sitting beside Maggie in the living room that evening, I felt an unusual astonishment and limitless admiration for her. This gentle girl, or gentlewoman, who still clings to me, hides within her depths a tremendous strength I never imagined she possessed. She knows everything we know, yet she never told me. She runs a massive project monitoring the Caledonia Canal with ultrasonic waves, and yet she hasn't uttered a single word about it. She saw that horrifying scene on the sacrificial rock, and yet she did not collapse. She didn't lose her mind. "You are strange, Miggy, and your mystery surpasses all my capacity for expectation." I said to her, "Why didn't you tell me? What your father told me today about the monster." She said cautiously, looking me straight in the eyes, "Well, what exactly did he tell you? How far did he go?" Once again, she impressed me. She was afraid my words were just a trick to make her slip up. Anyway, I started, recklessly, telling her everything Sir James had told me, while she listened in silence without interrupting. Then I asked her reproachfully, "Why didn't you inform the police about what you found on the island? They're far more capable than you of finding the thief who stole the horn and the necklace." She smiled mysteriously and said, "The police will never find the thief, because he left no trace. At least they can watch the rock to prevent another girl from being killed." She lifted her head confidently and said, "You don't understand. We have a goal far greater than all this, so don't make my father regret telling you what you were never meant to know." I sighed in frustration and said, "Fine, this vacation is over and I'll return tomorrow to Edinburgh. I want nothing to do with your suspicious projects." She said tenderly, in a tone I had almost forgotten the taste of. "You promised me you'd stay forever. At least stay with us this week, because my father won't return to Dundee tomorrow." Then she extended her index finger to my chin and added, "Trust us. Trust us." Heh. Silence fell for a few minutes, broken only by the ticking of the clock. I stood up and began pacing the room pensively, walking back and forth until I stopped in front of a grotesque oil painting hanging above the fireplace, depicting a shepherd playing a tune. Love for his beloved. I gazed at the painting for a moment, then turned away, and suddenly remembered something, so I looked at it again. There were faint marks of a hand carefully imprinted on its surface, as though a palm had often pressed that exact spot, until part of the oily layer had melted from sweat and friction. I didn't hesitate. I placed my palm on the same spot and pressed. Suddenly, I felt a mechanical lever move. And despite the rust and age that shrouded everything, the back wall of the fireplace slid aside with a chilling creak, revealing what looked like a well, with steps carved into its wall leading downward. I looked at Maggie questioningly, but her astonishment was genuine and clear. She clearly knew nothing about this secret door. So I said to her, "It's something quite common in Scottish mansions, a secret door leading somewhere." "But does your father know about it?" She shook her head in confusion and said, "I don't know. I only know this castle is full of hidden passages, but I've never seen one before. How foolish. I've spent my whole life wondering about the mystery of that hand painted on the canvas, and I never thought to press it. I doubt any of the servants ever tried either. It's only ever been brushed by a duster, nothing more." I smiled with the pride of a victor, then took off the suit jacket I was wearing, pulled a candle from the candelabrum fixed above the fireplace, and lit it with a match. She said anxiously, "But where do you think you're going?" I said as I tucked my body into the fireplace. "What a strange question. I'm not going to Disneyland anyway." She said in terror, her body trembling, "Wouldn't it be wise to wait until we tell my father?" I looked at her meaningfully and said, "My angel, I'm not one of those strong-willed people who find a secret passage in an old Scottish castle and then hesitate to enter it. It's stronger than me." She shouted sharply, "Wait, I'm coming with you? I have to make sure you don't die." But before I could understand, we had already entered the well, she and I, descending the rocky steps, while I was careful that the flame of the candle wouldn't catch the edge of her dress. Fortunately, there weren't many steps. At the bottom of the well, there was a long cellar, reeking of dampness. Clang! What was that sound? And what was the mystery behind the sudden darkness that filled the cellar? Maggie raised her head upward, then said, "Nothing. The stone wall has closed behind us." What a fool I am! The door must have stayed open for a limited time before closing. Why didn't I keep her outside, or put something to block the wall from shutting? They always remember these details in the movies, but I'm not a movie hero and I wasn't trained for this sort of thing. And now, here we are, standing in this unknown cellar, with no weapon and no source of light except this candle. I said, "Maggie, my angel, I'm afraid we're in real trouble." Her eyes sparkled in the dark under the candlelight. Then she clapped her hands cheerfully and exclaimed, "This is the most wonderful experience of my life. Imagine, you and I in this terrifying cellar, together, feeling our way along the walls, trembling, walking through the mud among the corpses of rats and the bones of those before us. Then hunger and thirst take hold of us, and then you tear yourself apart for my sake, taking off your shirt to shield me from the cold. Then I die and breathe my last in your arms. Isn't that wonderful? What a complete fool you are. Women have a strange ability to find romance in situations that, for men, mean nothing but disaster." Then she continued in fascination. "And after hours, you die from grief over me, and our bodies decay, and after hundreds of years, when someone discovers this tomb, they'll find two skeletons, their hands intertwined, and when they try to separate them, they crumble into dust." I said mockingly, "Yes, like Esmeralda and the Hunchback of Notre Dame, right?" "Yes, we read it. It's touching enough to make one cry." I didn't know what to do. Should I strangle her, tear her apart, or just punch her in the teeth? I settled for saying, "There's still some time left before this wonderful ending, so I think we should move now. This place isn't romantic enough to die in." she said, having regained her composure while looking upward, but there must be an exit on this side. I replied, that makes sense. Whoever invents a way to enter surely invents a way to leave. So she and I began feeling the stones of the wall one by one, pressing on every protrusion that could move. We stomped the floor with our heels in every spot. I even climbed back up the stairs to examine the wall again, but to no avail. Maggie said, her face now serious again, if we keep up these clumsy attempts, we'll surely die. It seems we have no choice but to walk through this passage to its end. But what about the candle? Then she took a silk handkerchief from her dress pocket, moistened it with her saliva, rolled it into a ball, and kept it in her mouth for a few minutes. After that, she brought it close to the candle flame, and it began to burn very slowly because of the moisture. Then she said confidently, there. Now extinguish your candle until we really need it. I said in admiration, who taught you that trick? She replied, holding the burning handkerchief delicately by its edge and placing it over a piece of bone. In the last World War, housewives in London and Paris, trying to save energy, used damp newspapers to light their stoves. One newspaper was enough to cook a whole family's meal. I was 13 years old at the time. Ah, my dear, how can I play the role of the man who protects when it seems you are the one who will protect me? In silence, we made our way over the rough ground. Rats ran freely around us, and stagnant puddles covered the floor, seemingly formed by centuries of dampness. I will never forget our somber walk. She was a step ahead of me, holding the glowing handkerchief that cast mysterious shadows around her. How those shadows frightened me, as if they came from another world, leading me to sights no man had ever seen before. Did Dante feel as I did when Beatrice led him through the darkness of the other world? And then we began to see what she had jokingly predicted moments ago. Human bones scattered carelessly among the rocks, mixed with the bones of rats. I didn't want to tell her what that meant. There was no way out of this cellar. Those poor souls had tried before us and failed. They ate the rats alive, and then the rats ate them alive. No doubt this cellar was once a dungeon where the lord of the castle threw his enemies, leaving them to rot alive. But Maggie was clever, frighteningly clever. That's why she said to me in sorrow, Rifat, do you know what I think? Yes, we will not get out of this cellar alive. The predicament. The problem with the first-person style I use in my storytelling is that it automatically reassures the reader that I will escape every predicament I get into. Otherwise, what life would I have lived to tell it in my own voice? If I wrote in the third person, like he went, he ran, he feared, the reader would not be so certain of my safety. Yes, I admit that I have survived all the crises of my life up to this moment in which I write, and I admit that I have never died until today. But what terror and what panic I have gone through in all those scrapes. Take, for example, our walk in the dark cellar behind Maggie, the handkerchief's flame dancing, mysterious shadows playing over the scattered skulls here and there, as if they were moving and smiling. How do you expect me to assume we will survive? The scenes repeated themselves, and we must have walked a full kilometer in that endless cellar when Maggie stopped, whispering and panting. I cannot walk any further. She sat down in her elegant dress and took off her shoe, and she said, I am dying of cold even though it's July. I answered her, it's because of the damp. I sat beside her on the ground, took off my shirt and laid it over her shoulders, and said with a touch of gloating, romantic, isn't it? She snapped angrily, shut up. Then she added with disgust through her teeth, we'll have to learn to eat rats. I shuddered at the horror of the idea, and swallowing, I said, I'd rather wait a week without eating until I can accept the idea. She said as if spitting, if you hadn't been reckless and gone into that damned secret door, we wouldn't be here. I answered sharply, and if you hadn't followed me foolishly, you would have saved me. She curled up like a cat and pressed against me, saying, we'll wait here until morning. Put out that handkerchief because we won't need it for now. I hope you have enough matches. Of course, very few. A story is always like that. People who own full boxes of matches never lose their way in dark passages. What rotten luck you are. I extinguished the handkerchief, curled up, and began to humming, quietly and off-key, a sad Arabic song. In the dark, I heard her steady breathing beside me. The poor thing had fallen asleep. When we woke, the luminous hands of my watch pointed to 9 in the morning. She was sitting, threading her fingers through the strands of her messy hair, trying to arrange it somehow. I smiled sarcastically and said, "There goes, starting her day." She said, sleep still in her voice, "If I look like you when I wake up, you tramp, then I think we should never marry. What have our children done to deserve parents who look so terrifying?" I was about to reply with a cutting retort until I noticed something and shouted at once, "Yesterday, I couldn't see my hand the same way. Did you notice? I saw you and I saw myself. The darkness is less dense in the daytime," she said, "and that means that some light is entering this cellar from somewhere. It is still very faint, but it exists and we will find it." So, without breakfast and without washing our faces, we rose confidently and continued our walk without needing to light anything. There was no doubt that the light increased with every step we took forward. Suddenly, we encountered something we had not yet accounted for.
الوسط يبدو أوسع. يمكن يوصلنا للداخل.
احذر، أي صوت غريب ارجع فورا.
تمام، انتظري هنا. بسم الله.
The corridor branched into 3 narrower passages, all bathed in the same dim light. What a problem. We chose the middle passage and walked with it for a while until it branched into 2 passages. Here I grabbed her hand to stop her from continuing and said, "No, this is turning into a real maze in which we will be lost forever. We must be organized. First, we will follow the famous Theseus method. And who is he? He is the Greek hero who entered the labyrinth on the island of Crete to kill the Minotaur, that beast whose upper half was a bull and lower half a man. Theseus tied a thread at the entrance of the labyrinth so he would always know the point to return to, and thus he did not end like those before him. So, we will mark the walls by carving lines that indicate the passages we have passed. Second, we must separate so each of us explores one branch of these 2 alone, on the condition that we meet again in 2 hours, no matter what." Maggie said, "And whoever finds an exit must, on the way back, draw wavy lines so they differ from any lines drawn in other passages." "All right, then. Hand me my pen from my shirt pocket." I broke my pen in half so both pieces could be used for scratching on the walls, handed her one half, then wished her good luck, and we parted ways. Now I must hurry. I chose the right passage, which led me to 2 others. I chose the right one again, and walked along it for some time until I found it blocked by a stone wall. I went back to the branching point and chose the left passage, walked for a few minutes until I reached a point where it branched again into 3. I chose the middle one, and so on. You can imagine how complicated it all became. It's exhausting even on paper, let alone walking all that time over jagged rocks, breathing heavily while the broken tip of the pen cuts into your fingers. What kind of mad, sadistic mind could have designed these tunnels? Half an hour passed while I wandered through this labyrinth, and suddenly I noticed footprints. Clear footprints on the soft dust that had begun to cover the stones. Footprints that weren't mine nor Maggie's. They were far too large. I began following the prints, without forgetting to mark my lines, and my heart trembled. They couldn't belong to one of those decomposed dead bodies, for they were fresh and recent, and their owner was wearing modern shoes. The light grew stronger and stronger. And finally, there it was, what I had been searching for. An opening in the rock, barred by steel rods that someone had thankfully sawn through, and through it poured the light I had seen in the gloomy cellar. I moved closer to the window to see what it overlooked. Through the rocky gap, droplets of water sprayed gently. It was Loch Ness itself, lying before me in the bright morning sun, the most beautiful sight my eyes had ever seen. Beneath the window lay the shore's rocky edge, and at some distance stood a grim-looking rock standing alone amid the waves, caring neither for them nor for me. And upon the rock stood an old wooden pillar, from which hung frayed ropes. It wasn't hard to recognize that this was the rock of sacrifice that Sir James had told me about yesterday. Yesterday? Was it really only yesterday? In any case, I had found what I was looking for, and all that remained was to retrace my steps, drawing wavy lines over the straight ones I had made before, and wait for Maggie at the first branching point. Then we would leave this place together. I reached the point where I had started, and it was nearly 11 o'clock. I sat down on the ground to wait for Maggie, humming that same sad Arabic song, thinking about what I had just discovered. It was clear that this passage had once been completely sealed off by those dreadful bars. It had been a true tomb for anyone unfortunate enough to fall into it. Then came that good man who removed the bars, granting himself a chance at escape, and to enter the mansion whenever he wished, allowing him to reach Loch Ness easily and secretly, unaware that he was granting us a chance at life. Who is that person? And what is his purpose? I don't know, nor do I care to know at the moment. But my thoughts had carried me far away, and I hadn't noticed how quickly time had passed. It's now 11:30, and Maggie hasn't returned. Are the passages that intricate, or did she foolishly forget to mark her path? Or perhaps some danger? A pit, a fallen rock, has delayed her? Snakes of anxiety gnawed at my heart, and there was no choice but to follow her. I rose from my place and began to walk cautiously along the corridor she had taken. Her markings were neat, clear, and organized on the wall, so much so that I could almost picture her crystal hand tracing them 2 hours ago. A strange feeling, both nostalgic and ominous, swept over me toward those marks, as if the one who drew them would never return. The network of tunnels was indeed complicated, but I kept following the unbroken lines, except that, am I imagining things? No. Those scattered red drops on the ground could only be real. It was Maggie's blood. End of the mystery. Maggie, my angel, I swear I will tear them all apart. I'll slaughter them, scatter their limbs in the North Sea for the mysterious monsters to devour them all. I was panting as I ran after the trail of lines she had left, and the drops of blood that sometimes appeared and sometimes vanished. My thoughts were scattered. Panic paralyzed me. I muttered curses and threats at them, while I didn't even know who they were. I wanted something to pour my anger onto, so I invented imaginary enemies to blame. My pace quickened, my muscles tightened, my breath shortened. I was certain I would find her dead at my feet at any moment, bending over her, placing her head on my knees, her whispering incomprehensible words, then turning her face and dying. Just imagining that scene was enough to shatter whatever remained of my mind. My heart raced, my steps grew heavier, until I suddenly collided with something, and we both fell to the ground. I rose ready to fight, but found that it was her. Maggie, I screamed hysterically, tears streaming to my eyes, and tried to explain what had happened, but she smiled and patted me, speaking gently as if calming a wild horse. Hey, it's nothing. Don't be afraid, my little one. Nothing happened. Then she pointed to her hand, tied with a strip from the shirt she was wearing, and said, I cut my hand on your broken pen. That's all. Come on, calm down. Here, and I am ashamed to admit it, my nerves completely gave way, and I burst into tears like a small child. She looked at me in astonishment, then began to pat my shoulder tenderly, that tenderness only a woman can give and only a man can understand. After all, no matter how old we get, we are still miserable children who have just exited our mother's wombs. She said to me, Come on, fear nothing. Everything will be all right. Cry, cry, you'll feel better. And indeed, after the storm inside me subsided, I began to tell her what I had done during those 2 hours, how I had found the exit, how I had thought she was dead or wounded, and that I loved her like I've never loved anyone in my life. She smiled and said in a practical tone, All of that is lovely, but there's a stranger and more important discovery I made. Come with me, but first. Then she reached for a piece of cloth she had torn from the shirt she was wearing, and laughing lightly said, Blow your nose first. I don't like children who have snot dangling from their noses. I sighed and said, All right, she said, smiling. There! In silence, I followed her down that narrow, strange passage. It gradually widened until I found myself in a large, well-lit stone chamber. Do you know the look of a pharaoh's burial chamber in the Great Pyramid? If you do, you've spared me the trouble of description. If you haven't, that's your problem. I'm still excited and can't talk much. In a corner of the room, there was a blonde girl pinned to the wall. She was by no means English. She was utterly exhausted, her face bearing signs of severe beating. Maggie said proudly, "Here is my discovery." Then she leaned toward the girl as if introducing one of us to the other at a social gathering. "I present to you Miss Erica Siegfried, the next offering for the Loch Ness Monster." I was dumbfounded, but bit by bit I began to understand. I turned to the bound girl and asked, the ring of her name giving me a certain idea, "Are you Danish?" Her voice came hoarse, and in broken English she said, "I'm Norwegian. I study English literature in Edinburgh." Maggie cried out excitedly, "See? Blonde and of Scandinavian origin. That fiend kidnapped her, tied her up, and fed her while waiting for the lunch appointment." And she was cut off irately. "Can't you see we should postpone that lecture until we free this poor thing? Why didn't you do that?" Maggie replied simply, "I don't have a tool suitable for unfastening these chains. And my hand is cut, remember?" Then she patted my scrawny muscles with delight and said, "Now let's see what my hero will do with these restraints. Come on, let's see." My face burned with anger, and I began trying to undo the chains to no avail. All I managed to do was tear the Norwegian woman's wrist more. She ground her teeth and moaned. After 10 minutes, I was utterly finished. My palms were torn and bleeding, so I hung my head in shame, admitting my failure. Maggie said, "Let me try." She took out the ink pen, slipped it into the lock of the chain, and fiddled here and there until, click, the lock ring opened easily. She began to undo the chains around the Norwegian girl's neck and wrists, who glanced at me with a mocking smile and said, "You've got nothing but brute force. I wish it were any good." The girl collapsed to the floor and began to tell her story. She is, as I mentioned earlier, a language student in Edinburgh. She met a young man of Norwegian origin who said he was studying medicine there. He invited her to his house, but after deceiving her, he kidnapped her and brought her to this place. When she came to, she found herself bound like this. He fed her regularly and told her to prepare for the greatest feast befitting the spirits of her ancestors, which would take place in 2 weeks, when her body, the lucky one, would be presented to be eaten by the Loch Ness Monster. I asked her, "And was he with you regularly?" She said, "No, I would see him twice a day, coming out of the cellar's darkness. I don't know where he comes from or where he goes." Maggie said with a sneer, "And is that a question? Of course he used to come from the drawing room in your father's mansion and return to it. He must have visited you at dawn and at midnight, when the house was free of people asking awkward questions." I said to Maggie, "Do you think so? And how did he get into the mansion?" She answered me, "He never needed to enter the mansion." "What do you mean?" "I mean he was always there. Believe me, dear Erica, this man had blue eyes, a thick yellow mustache, and long blonde hair. In short, just like the Vikings as we see them in comic books." Erica said, "Indeed, and his name is Unfred Holthrop. He is a servant at our house, and he used to take many leaves to visit Edinburgh, and he must have cast his nets around me and around that wretch Jocelyn." I asked her, puzzled, "And what makes you have a Norwegian servant?" She replied, "So what? He is polite and orderly and speaks very refined English, and my father liked his Scandinavian features very much." So I told her, "The threads are coming together now. This servant used to work for you, and one night he heard a conversation between your father and the late Gold about the Loch Ness Monster to whom the Vikings offered sacrifices. Then he sees the horn, the necklace, and that map, and then this servant begins to change. We do not know the circumstances or the causes of his transformation. Is it a crazy pride in his nationality? Are pagan beliefs stirring in his subconscious? Is it a desire for mischief or a craving for distinction? We will never know except from him. The important thing is that the idea fermented in his mind, and so he stole the horn and the necklace and decided to exploit this secret tunnel, which he found by chance, in his dreadful mission. He was smarter than us when he first entered this tunnel, and he did not forget to secure the door behind him. Then he realized that the tunnel led to near the Rock of Sacrifice, so he set up the bars that blocked the tunnel to ensure himself a permanent exit. He began abducting blonde girls who belonged to his race and imprisoning them here. The dramatic strain in his blood made him believe that the Loch Ness monster would devour only the same kind of victims that it had eaten in the past. Scandinavians, the granddaughters of the northern raiders. And when the moment comes, according to his calculations, he ties the girl to the rock, stands at Urquhart Castle, and blows the horn. Then the monster comes out, remembering the ancient call of food to do its work and end the tragedy. You are reborn, Miss Siegfried. Then the girl gasped, began to tremble, and said through her tears, he was hideous. He would come to me reciting verses in a language I didn't know, slip strange-tasting foods into my mouth, then perform bizarre prayers and force me to repeat them with him, and if I refused, he would slap me. He was preparing your soul for the great sacrifice, Maggie said nervously. Now, let's get out of this dreadful tomb. Daddy must be worried sick about us, and we must find that fiend before he realizes anything. Then she looked at the girl tenderly and asked her, Can you walk with us, my dear? No, my feet are completely numb. I haven't moved them in ages. I looked at Maggie and she winked toward the girl. I approached her and whispered in her ear, Maggie, don't tell me you want me to carry her. Why not? You're our only man, unfortunately. But she's as heavy as a whale. Why don't you believe I'm not Tarzan? Only in lousy films is carrying girls who can't walk easy. There's a huge, broad-shouldered man who knows how to throw punches, pick locks, and wrestle bears, and it's not me. She cut me off sharply. Rifat, carry her. All right. So I hoisted the girl and staggered on, while Maggie followed behind us, guided by the marks she'd made to the meeting point, then by the wavy lines I'd drawn, until we reached the stone window. It wasn't difficult to climb down the rocks with the girl. The waters of Loch Ness were rolling, and in the distance that ominous rock appeared to us. Maggie pointed at it and looked up at the girl with a meaning that said, Do you see what awaited you? The girl trembled and dug her fingers into my arm. We had won the battle, but does war ever bring peace? We emerged from the tunnel, weighed down by what we had seen there. The sea behind us roared, as if bearing witness to the madness this place had known. The girl in our arms was trembling, and Maggie tried to hide her fear behind a mask of courage. As for me, I knew that what had happened in those depths was only the beginning. Every step we took away from that cursed rock brought us closer to a greater secret. A secret waiting for us at the castle's table, where Sir James sat, with answers in his eyes, and perhaps new curses as well. Ewan Fraser. The dinner was truly delicious, the one Sir James served us after we emerged from the cellar. Poor Erica devoured the food ravenously, while Maggie fussed with the butter with her table knife, drawing patterns on the rim of her plate, her mind completely elsewhere. Sir James, lighting a cigar, said, Eat heartily. You escaped miraculously. I said with my mouth full, It's strange you didn't know anything about that tunnel. He replied calmly, That's natural, for our family manuscripts speak of 10 other tunnels whose locations are not specified, and they don't mention a buried treasure. So why should I waste my time then? Maggie suddenly lifted her head from her plate as if she'd remembered something. Daddy, where did Unfred go? Sir James shook his head in annoyance and exhaled smoke from his mouth. We didn't find him. The scoundrel fled last night. I asked, puzzled. But how did he know we discovered him? Maggie, blushing, took something from her pocket and said, I found this small card yesterday when we went down the tunnel, and I didn't pay it any attention. I looked at her in surprise, and Sir James, after examining the card, said, Ah, it's an old trick. The scoundrel slipped this card into a crack in the wall so that if the door were opened, it would fall out. When he comes back to enter the tunnel and finds it missing, he realizes someone discovered his secret. Sir James continued, exhaling deeply. That's why he didn't bring dinner for Erica last night. He was about to enter the tunnel carrying her food, but he found the note missing. Then he knew his secret was exposed, so he fled. Maggie said anxiously, But what shall we do now? Sir James bowed his head in thought, then said in a mysterious tone, He will not stop trying. He still has the horn and the necklace, and his mad dream. I said quickly, Then let's alert the police to watch the rock. He thought a little longer, then said, No, there's a better idea. I picked up the last piece of meat from the plate and tossed it into my mouth. That's good news. My head is about to burst from bad thoughts. Sir James smiled mysteriously and said, I'll introduce you tonight to a rare sort of person. Ewan Fraser waved his hand mockingly. The number of lunatics in this world has surpassed that of humanity itself. Sir James nodded in agreement, seemingly unaware that the statement carried a subtle insult to everyone present, including himself. Fraser went on, saying, Take that madman Anfred, for example. He believes that the honor of his ancestors depends on throwing girls to a monster that tears them to pieces. Ewan Fraser was a large, muscular man with dark skin, a fiery blonde beard, and wild locks of hair framing his head. His gaze was both insolent and intimidating in an unpleasant way, and he ate with needless agitation. At dinner, Sir James had introduced him to us as an old friend, saying that he was skilled in every art of hunting. He had once been a shark hunter. A shark hunter? And whales! And tigers! Sir James exclaimed with the wonder of a child. He's hunted crocodiles. He went to India for tigers. And he hunted elephants in Africa before the authorities banned it. Ewan tapped his chest proudly and said, In fact, there's nothing on earth that can be hunted that I haven't tried. Then he began telling us stories of his adventures in the jungles of Africa, the savannas, and the high seas. He had hunted everything from birds to whales, and his knowledge of weapons and projectiles was beyond price. I am not naturally envious, nor am I one of those who resent others being in the spotlight. But I felt a lump in my throat as I saw the look of admiration on Maggie's face, drinking in every word from his lips as if it were the water of life. He carried her away with his words, to the Amazon basin, to the Congo jungles, to the plains of China, and she was dreaming. I am not jealous at all, but I loathe such a sadistic beast who delights in tormenting God's beautiful creatures, who cannot sleep peacefully until he is certain that another animal will not see the sun tomorrow. And Maggie loves this. He would say, my garden. That scoundrel Anfred deserves to be torn apart by a bullet, then his corpse trampled and fed to the dogs. Even in his passion for good, he was as wicked as the devil himself. How could Maggie and Sir James fail to notice such traits? I leaned toward Maggie and whispered in her ear, Why did your father bring this butcher here? She didn't answer, for she was listening intently to his tales, her eyes wide with wonder, her lips slightly parted. Maggie turned toward me in confusion, as if I had woken her from a wonderful dream, and asked, What? I said, Why did your father bring this murderer here? She muttered irritably, I think there's only one explanation, and I don't believe you're that stupid. Now be quiet. What he's saying really matters to me. She went back to listening to his words with her whole being. I drained the glass of juice before me and felt that no drink in the world could quench my thirst or wash away the bitterness in my throat. And dinner ended. Ewan wiped his mouth roughly with the napkin, then announced that he must leave and return early tomorrow to discuss business, as he put it. He shook Sir James's hand and then mine. His grip felt as if it were carved from stone, before taking Maggie's hand and bowing to kiss it, his eyes never leaving hers. Then he departed. I burst out in alarm as soon as the door closed. Sir James, don't tell me you plan to cooperate with that animal to kill the Loch Ness monster? He shrugged indifferently and said, And why not? We haven't agreed yet, but killing the creature is exactly what I want. He looked at me in surprise. Do you have a better idea? I said, Yes. What business is it of ours anyway? Why don't we just inform the police and be done with it? He placed his hand on my shoulder with the calm patience of a man in prayer and said, My son, killing the monster gives us two opportunities, two birds with one stone. First, it will end the chain of sacrifices that would surely continue as long as that creature, Lothrop, remains free. And second, it will fulfill our long-cherished dream. We will have the complete, intact body of the Loch Ness creature, for the world to see, for scientists to study, and for the curators of the Natural History Museum to preserve. Fraser will offer me my scientific glory, the fruit of our struggles, on a golden platter. But even if we accept this, how can he possibly kill it? That's his problem, he said, smiling and winking at me as he left the hall. Trust that he'll find a way. I didn't argue much, but deep down I believed that the Loch Ness monster deserved its life, after surviving 8 centuries, free and untamed, while generations came and went. It was no more evil than a lion that eats only flesh, innocent of wrongdoing. If someone throws a man to the lion and the beast devours him, do you punish the lion or the criminal who prepared every condition for the kill? But all this was premature, for I doubted that this so-called man could harm anything fiercer than a wild rabbit. They've been trying to catch this monster since 1933, and every one of them has failed. So what could Ewan Fraser possibly do that all those before him could not? In the morning, I went to Maggie's room. The door was open, and there she sat at the table with something like headphones over her ears. In front of her were complete sculpting tools, a complex tangle of wires, and a microphone hanging just a few centimeters from her mouth. Beside her stood a complicated machine resembling a heart rate monitor, from which a long paper strip emerged covered with jagged lines. Next to it were a coffee thermos and a cup. And as soon as she noticed me, she raised her hand in greeting. Silently, I said curiously, "Maggie, what is the—" But she stopped me with a sharp look from her eyes and gestured reproachfully toward the strip of paper emerging from the device, covered with many jagged, wavy lines. Now I understood. She was testing a complex machine that converts sound vibrations into visual patterns, a phonogram, making them easier to analyze and measure. But what was the point of this experiment? And why did she suddenly remember that she was a physicist at this very moment? Then I saw her pick up something long and white that looked like a horn. She brought it to her lips and blew into it before the microphone. Nothing. No sound. Yet the paper kept creeping out of the machine, filled with dense, overlapping lines. She reached for the switch and turned the device off, then removed the headphones from her head with a sigh of relief. She poured herself some coffee and handed me the thermos and another cup. "Drink, help yourself. I'm busy." I sat down, realizing that the ban on questions was now lifted. "No thanks. Now tell me, what are you doing?" She pointed to the device and said, "As you can see." I picked up the horn she had crafted, examining it in admiration. "It's beautifully made." She smiled. "Thanks. Be careful not to trip over those wires." I asked, "Where did you get the ivory you carved it from?" "It's a piece Ewan Fraser gave me yesterday," I said sarcastically. "How very kind of him." Maggie cut the strip of paper filled with the latest lines, then stood and moved to a sheet of transparent paper hanging beside her bed, covered with similar markings. She placed the two sheets on top of each other. She said excitedly, "What do you think?" The wavy lines matched perfectly. I spoke in confusion. "Amazing, but what does it mean?" She explained eagerly. "The transparent sheet shows the sound vibrations produced by the original stolen horn, the Viking horn. And the other one shows the vibrations from the horn I carved all night, trying to match the same frequency and wavelength." Then she lifted her head proudly and said, "They're an exact match." I was stunned, and she smiled a triumphant smile. "That means I've recreated the horn they used to summon the Loch Ness monster." Then she looked at the horn in wonder and added, "But the strange thing is, it makes no sound at all." No, those are vibrations at a very high frequency beyond the range of the human ear, but there are other ears that can hear them, just like dog whistles. The Loch Ness monster recognizes that frequency and waits for it. I said sarcastically, "If that were true, it would burst into the room now wagging its tail like a dog. You must have blown into that horn dozens of times." She playfully hit my shoulder with her fist and said affectionately, "Don't be ridiculous. The range of this horn's sound won't reach the lake unless we blow it at the castle." Then she looked at the horn with intense wonder, the wonder of an artist at a statue he has just finished, and said, "This way we can summon Nessie whenever Ewan wishes so he can kill it. I've finished my task, only the carving of the necklace remains." She opened a book in front of her and took out a sheet on which, sketched in pencil by shading, was an exact copy of the stolen sacrificial necklace. The drawing was crude, showing a dragon devouring a girl who looks up at the sky, surrounded by ornate letters that did not speak of good taste. She said, holding up the sheet, "I'll need your help. You're good at drawing and carving. We must make a bronze necklace that matches this drawing exactly." I smiled and said, "With pleasure. But what's the point of it?" She looked at me in astonishment and said in a surprised tone, "Sometimes I don't understand you, Rifat. How will the Loch Ness monster devour me if I'm not wearing the sacrificial necklace? Our plan must succeed. Ewan Fraser unrolled the sheet of paper he carried across the table and pointed with the tip of his burning cigarette at scattered red dots here and there, saying with manic enthusiasm, "Here it is. An entire network at various depths of filthy naval mines. One touch of the detonator, and this monster's remains will be blasted across the heavens. We'll have so much fun. Ha!" Sir James said in horror, "Wait a moment, you butcher. We don't just want to kill the creature. We want to kill it and keep its body intact. The purpose is scientific and for research." Fraser chewed his cigar in frustration, then said, "Yes, indeed, and besides, the explosion would shatter the woman too." "The woman? That's how this brute speaks of my gentle beloved Maggie. He truly has no trace of decency, nor much intelligence either." He scratched his head for several minutes, then said, "Actually, I can't think of a way to kill this beast without tearing it apart. You say it's about 12 meters long?" "Yes, that's what they said." "That's a lot. Then, after some hesitation, "There's one unsatisfactory solution. We lure it close, then fire heavy cartridges, like those used for hunting rhinos, into its vital spot, the eyes, the space between them, and its throat." Sir James said, "But that makes the whole plan depend on our reaction in the instant it surfaces, and on your aim. And surely it will thrash and rage, and we can't guarantee a strike from its tail, if it has one, that might knock Maggie away or tear her apart." I shouted angrily, "You're still talking as if Maggie would actually agree to stand there as the monster's victim. I refuse, and I absolutely forbid it." Ewan looked at me and Sir James with a glance that clearly said, "What's wrong with this idiot?" Sir James looked at me firmly and said, "Dr. Ismail, whether Maggie accepts or refuses is none of your concern. She alone has the right to decide. She knows we need her role, and she knows we won't let any harm touch her. So don't play the part of the tender lover at the expense of my love for her as a father. In other words, you're not the only one who loves her in this world." And then Maggie cried out, trying to calm the situation, "Rafat, please, I accept that. I even welcome it." She cried out, on the verge of tears, and it was strange that Sir James had never been so angry with me before. "Then why don't you offer him that girl, Erica? Isn't she of the Scandinavian stock he loves?" Maggie said. "The poor thing couldn't endure another terrible ordeal, whereas I can endure it." Ewan looked at Maggie with a mixture of confidence and cunning, and said, "The monster will not distinguish between a Scandinavian girl and a Scottish girl. All girls are the same. What a pig!" And the harshest days of my life began. Ewan took to staying with us almost day and night, his fetid breath dogging me and his coarse speech, thinking it was flirtation, spoiling every moment for me. Sir James welcomed him. Maggie smiled, and I burned inside. Maggie had changed greatly. I no longer saw myself in her eyes, and I knew, with a real fear, that I was beginning to lose her. It was my fault. I had loved her with a quiet, monotonous love, like a stagnant river. Nothing new, no surprises. I lost her the day I became certain she would not lose me. As for Ewan, he embodied everything I lacked. A capricious charmer, a stormy sea. You never knew if such a man would be tiring or would always excite her. My steadiness, my loyalty, and my everlasting admiration were the reasons she slipped through my fingers like water. Women, unfortunately, usually cannot do without the dazzled lover. Yet in their hearts, they may still echo the voice of the coarse seducer striding before them without care. Let this be a lesson for me in the stories to come. Ewan Fraser returned to the mansion carrying a large roll. He unfurled it on the dining room table before the disgusted gaze of Graham, the head servant, to show us his wonders. There were 2 large bottles filled with some liquid, and embedded in the base of each was something resembling an arrow. Waving them, he said, "Now behold my latest achievement," and proceeded to explain the idea. These bottles are filled with concentrated sulfuric acid and fitted so they can be mounted in the muzzle of a depth rifle. When the monster surfaces with its mouth agape, my brother and I will fire these 2 bottles at it. They will burst immediately into its gullet and cause terrible burns that may kill it at once, leaving nothing usable. And it might not die, I said, doubtfully and coldly. He smiled with a mocking chest and said, "Then its fervor will subside, and it will dive into the depths until we free the woman, and then we'll think of another solution. Sir James expressed enthusiasm for the idea, and Maggie agreed. As for me, my view was clear. It would be a massacre if this lunatic's suggestion were followed. Nessie would not die without turning the lake upside down, uprooting the rock on which Maggie stood, tearing us all to pieces, and a dozen other horrific scenarios. Ewan said to me sharply, "Listen, brother, either propose a better idea or shut up." And so the appointed day approached. With a wound on my body and an anxious spirit, I began to make the accursed bronze necklace that my former beloved would wear when she presented herself to the Loch Ness monster. And I awaited my fate. I trained with Ewan on using my depth rifle and on mounting and removing the bottles of corrosive acid from the muzzles of our rifles. Fraser taught me how to fire my rifle and then fall back to reload it at the moment he fired his, so the stream of bottles would never cease. He said, "The more the burns spread across the beast's body and the more its wounds open, the easier the aim becomes." Fraser was practical to a large degree. He taught me a great deal, and he did not ask Sir James for a single penny for his efforts. His love of destruction was pure, without worldly motive. The idea of killing the monster made him forget all material ambitions and the trivialities of our shallow lives. Then the day came, and at last, the scene with which I began this story unfolded. The four of us in a boat rocking between the lake's waves, heading toward the accursed Rock of Offerings. Mist covered the water's surface and made visibility difficult, which made aiming all the harder. Maggie put on the necklace in silence, unbraided her hair so that strands of her blonde hair scattered over her shoulder. Sir James checked our steadiness and resolve to proceed, except, of course, for me, then helped Maggie climb onto the rock, which was sprinkled with the bones of dozens of hands, the remains of girls in the bloom of youth. Sacrifices had been offered here for 8 centuries. Then Ewan Fraser tied her with a loose superficial knot to the wooden post, making sure a simple movement would free her hands whenever she wished. We left her standing there, alone, dear to my soul, brave, and descended to the boat. Sir James took us to the shore rocks near Urquhart Castle. Then Ewan and I returned to the rock where we hid in the boat, and our eyes saw Maggie, or rather her ghost, standing in the fog. Sir James was to blow the horn when the clock struck exactly 12. Silence reigned after our 2 rifles, and we arranged the bottles of acid in the bottom of the skiff. Ewan was completely tense, but masked it with a coat of bloodthirsty truculence and arrogance, while my heart was ready to leap from my mouth, if not for my silence restraining it. The fog was cold and heavy like a nightmare, and a bird of ill omen whose species I did not know circled the rock in tightening loops. The boat swayed. Ewan lit a cigarette, reached into his bag, and pulled out a flashlight with 2 wires attached to a car battery. He connected the ends of the wires to a small clip, and a faint yellow light glowed. The flashlight managed to melt the fog around the rock, so Maggie appeared standing and squinted against the brightness. We were positioned 20 meters from the rock. I said to him admiringly, "Don't forget anything." He threw his cigarette into the water a second later. His nerves could not stand it. He answered, "Of course, the fog spoils 90% of well-laid plans. That's a fact. The important thing now is that this doesn't ruin everything. The monster is not used to these theatrical effects at its dinner table." Fraser unconsciously lit another cigarette, then looked at his watch and whispered anxiously, 3 minutes left. The bird kept circling the aisle at times, its wicked eyes flashing in the flashlight beam, then leaving the circle to become merely a fluttering shadow in a dark sky. The boat rocked slowly, cigarette smoke, my heartbeats, and my dry throat. Ewan's grip tightened on the rifle. In my imagination, I saw Sir James standing in the dark at Urquhart Castle, raising the ivory horn to his lips and blowing. That stillness, that fetid silence you can almost hear echo sharply in your ears as if it burns them. The water's surface moved. My grip tightened on the rifle. Something huge and black rose from the lake. Water cascaded off it, and the waves thrashed and climbed. Slowly and confidently, it shook off the drops and moved. Now we could see it clearly. The head and the neck, and the eyes. I heard Fraser whisper, so quietly that his cigarette fell from his lips, "My God!" A legendary creature had emerged from natural history books and Viking legends, lifting its head above the water and advancing toward the rock. A neck as long as a serpent's, a gigantic head with blazing eyes, and a horse-like crest, as witnesses had described. Something Mrs. Gold could not have believed. It had not yet entered the beam of light, but my terror grew at the mere sight of the face known to northern raiders. I raised my rifle toward it, but Fraser's trembling hand seized mine. For the first time, I caught a glimpse of genuine horror in his eyes, and he whispered, "Don't fire! You've ruined our plan." I said in astonishment, "What?" He answered, "My calculations were wrong. Only a torpedo will do against this thing. Don't provoke its rage. The operation is doomed." Then he added in a low voice, "The effect of our shells will be like what a cup of hot tea does to your tongue. It will rage and open the gates of hell on us and the woman." Then Ewan began to row toward the rock slowly and cautiously, and the monster advanced at the same pace from the other side. Fraser drew a knife from his belt and whispered as he tossed it toward me, "Try to free the girl. I'll watch your back from here. Get her ready. Then we return to shore as fast as we can. This thing is slow, at least I hope so." I planted myself in front of the rock, rifle in hand, on that stage prepared for tragedy, and I cast my eyes over the terrible scene the victim would see. What terror and what dread would seize the heart of the bound girl as she watched that legendary creature head toward her. Fortunately, it was still distant, so I lunged behind Maggie and began to tear her bonds with the knife without her asking a thing. Her eyes were fixed as if spellbound. The monster drew closer, lifting its head from the water in dreadful silence. It was coming for her. For Maggie. "Maggie, my love, don't try anymore. We've realized our limitations," I whispered. "Maggie, I." Suddenly, before I knew what was happening, a black shadow leapt over me from one of the rock's crevices and hurled itself at me, trying to snatch the knife from my hand, cursing in a language I didn't know. I assumed a fighting stance instinctively, struck it a heavy blow with the butt of my rifle to the head, then a frantic kick to its lower belly. But the promise was strong, and he quickly regained his balance, sending me a kick stronger than mine to the stomach. My ears rang, and the air burst from my mouth, but luckily, I couldn't afford the luxury of fainting. He shouted between his teeth in English as he kicked the knife from my hand, "You sons of devils! You'll ruin everything!" Then the light fell upon his face, and I saw his yellow mustache and long hair. I didn't need to waste time figuring out who he was. It was Anfred Holthrop. Anfred, who had been hiding all this time atop the rock, in this pit, waiting to see what we would do. And at this critical moment, he revealed himself in the fiercest way possible. Worst of all, he had managed to snatch the knife from me. I stared at his frenzied, mad face and the white teeth he bared like a wolf, realizing that I could never defeat him. "But where was Fraser?" he said, waving the knife. "You'll anger Odin, you fools. Don't you dare deprive the beast of its sacrifice, you English dog." The beast was approaching the rock. No time. Maggie was completely stunned and would be of no help, and this fanatic was brandishing the knife in my face, clearly skilled with it. I had no other choice. I shouted, "Now, my boy, I've run out of time. You asked for it." I pulled the trigger, and the flask of burning acid flew toward him from less than 4 meters away. The bottle exploded against his face and body. The spray splashed on me as I heard him scream like a man tortured in the depths of hell. I saw him twisting, writhing, dancing the mad dance of agony, and smelled the stench of burning flesh. Thankfully, I didn't see his face again. He had moved out of the light. He staggered, screamed, stood up, then threw himself into the water, muttering words I couldn't understand in a language unknown to me. He swam toward the beast without realizing it, unable to see anything. And then, the beast stretched its long neck, lowering its head into the churning water, and opened its jaw full of fangs. Water splashed, stained with red. I glimpsed hands trying to push away those massive jaws, and a scream of terror. Then, nothing. The head rose again confidently upon its neck, and this living nightmare began to sink slowly and solemnly into the water, creating a massive whirlpool around it. Bubbles multiplied on the surface, and strange things floated and swayed upon the water. Then silence. I left Maggie and ran to the boat to see. Fraser hadn't come or done anything after all that had happened, which could only mean one thing. And there he was, lying at the bottom of the boat, his head bleeding. The lunatic had struck him with something on the head, but he was still alive. So he must have swum from the shore to the rock, hit Fraser from behind with an oar, then climbed up to stop me. The fisherman whispered weakly, leaning on his arms, "The beast? It has received its final offering and departed." I looked toward the lake, whose surface had once again fallen into slumber over its hidden secrets. The Loch Ness monster had earned its freedom and its life, and no creature would ever be able to take them away from it after us. Epilogue. Sir James said, and thus ended that story, without us offering the world any proof of the monster's existence, let alone its body. All that effort was in vain. Then he looked at me reproachfully. "If only you hadn't thrown the sacrificial pendant and the ivory horn into the lake, we could have arranged another meeting with the creature. Better prepared this time. But I'll be honest with you, I'm not as angry as I try to seem." Maggie, smiling and refreshed after a long sleep, said, "The problem is that Rafat barged into my room last night and forced me to." "To what?" "To burn everything I had written down about the frequencies and wavelengths of the horn, so that I couldn't make another one. He even tore up the sheet where we drew that cursed pendant." Sir James shook his head in regret, then stood to prepare for his trip to Edinburgh, promising to take me with him. I said to Maggie, while adjusting my clothes before the mirror in the sitting room. "Thus the monster will remain Scotland's treasure. People will keep wondering about its nature and rejoice at the fleeting glimpses of it beneath the water. It will grow used to eating fish again and forget all this nonsense, until centuries later someone finds the horn and blows it once more." I looked at Maggie. In her eyes was that steady look I always feared, and she whispered, "Forever?" "What? You said you'd stay with me forever. So why are you leaving now?" "Have you forgotten Ewan Fraser?" She looked at me in astonishment, then burst out laughing and clapping her hands. "So you're jealous of Ewan Fraser. I never realized that before, nor did I know you were that insecure. Oh, come now, Rifat. If I fell in love with every man who told me an entertaining story, I'd still be a foolish girl. He's amusing, yes, but a clown and a butcher. Do you think I'm too stupid to see that?" Then she playfully pointed her finger at my nose. "I'm no longer a teenager. I'm nearing 40, and a woman at 40 understands what love truly is. But a woman loves her man not because he's the strongest, nor the handsomest, nor the richest, but because he is him. Do you understand that? Because he is who he is, with his weakness and his strength, his frailty, his asthma, and his narrow coronary arteries. Because he is him. And love. It wasn't a show of strength, but a warm, steady flow of devotion. How could I forget our shared struggles so easily?" My face grew more somber. Her reasoning was clever, sharp, but I still couldn't find peace. Until she said, "You're not that helpless, you know. You saved me, and even Ewan Fraser himself. You freed your beloved's bonds just like Tarzan frees Jane at the end of those old films. And you did it for me." I said sadly, finishing her sentence, "and killed." "You didn't kill him," she replied softly. "He threw himself at the monster. He left you no choice. That's the difference between you and Fraser. He would have bragged about burning Anfred with acid if he were in your place." I trembled with emotion, almost impressed by myself, and nearly broke into tears, but I held myself together and told her that I had to leave once again, because my roots were back in Egypt, my work, my family, my home, my grave. When I promised to stay with her, I hadn't known what I was saying. I was swept away by a volcano of emotion that spewed promises without restraint. She brought her face close to mine and whispered with transparent sorrow, "Forever? What? You'll remember me, then forever? Until the stars burn out, until—" Suddenly she screamed in terror, pointing behind me. "Rifat! That iron armor belonging to Sir Archibald MacKillop. It's moving! I swear it is! There's a ghost in this hall!" So we'd finished with our friend Nessie, only for dear Archibald MacKillop to begin haunting our lives. I said with exasperation as I stepped away and packed my bag, "I'll come back for this matter someday. Try to keep that ghost in good condition for me." "Very well," she said. "That's a promise." A week, or perhaps more later, I was back in my home in Doki, in beloved Cairo. New memories began to take their place in the museum of my mind, on the shelves of my reflections. I thought my troubles had ended. But as usual, I was wrong. There was another nightmare waiting for me, in the same house, on the same floor. But that is another story. What you have just heard is only one chapter of a long novel, a journey that has not ended yet, and secrets that have not all been revealed. In the upcoming parts, you will find the truth becoming more mysterious, and the events more thrilling. So be ready, because the story has not spoken its final word yet.